There are moments in life when silence says more than any scream ever could. When the person you love the most looks you in the eyes and decides you no longer belong in their world. That's the day something inside you breaks, not with a sound, but with a stillness that echoes through your bones. My name is Evelyn Moore, and on my 69th birthday, my son drove me to what I thought was a dinner celebration, only to leave me at the doorstep of a nursing home, a place he called temporary, but I knew, from the coldness in his voice, that he meant forever. The morning of my birthday began like any other. Soft light pouring through the lace curtains, the faint hum of the kettle on the stove, and the loneliness that had become my uninvited companion. I had been a widow for 12 years. My husband, Richard, had passed after a long battle with lung cancer, leaving behind a modest house, a small pension, and a son we had both adored. Michael. He had been our pride, our joy, our reason for everything. I worked 2 jobs so he could go to college, and Richard sold his old car to help pay for the down payment on Michael's first apartment. We had believed, foolishly, that love like ours built something unbreakable. But I was wrong. Love, I learned, is only unbreakable when both hearts are willing to hold the pieces. That morning, Michael called early, his voice bright and rehearsed. "Happy birthday, Mom. How about a little drive today? I've got a surprise for you." I remember smiling, my heart leaping like a child's. I thought he'd planned something sweet, a dinner, a visit from my granddaughter Lily, maybe a quiet afternoon at the lake. I put on my favorite lavender dress, the one Richard always said made me look like spring, and even wore a bit of perfume for the first time in months. My hands shook as I pinned my hair. I hadn't been out much since the arthritis made walking harder, but the thought of spending the day with my boy filled me with warmth. When he arrived, he hugged me quickly, too quickly, the way people do when they're trying to rush through affection. He didn't look at me long. His eyes darted toward his phone, toward the door, anywhere but the wrinkles on my face that mirrored his father's. Still, I didn't let myself notice. Love is good at blinding us when we most need to see. We drove in silence for most of the ride. I tried asking about work, about Lily, about how he was managing since the divorce, but every answer was clipped, shallow, as if each word was costing him something. I thought maybe he was stressed, maybe tired, maybe I was overthinking. Mothers do that. We take scraps of attention and sew them into quilts of excuses. When the car finally stopped, I looked up and saw a tall brick building with white shutters, trimmed hedges, and a sign that read, Willow Grove Senior Living. My stomach tightened. "Michael," I said softly, "what is this place?" He smiled, or tried to. It's just a temporary stay, Mom. You've been alone too long. You need care company. A place where you'll be safe." I blinked. Safe? I'm not unsafe in my own home. "Mom, please," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You fell last month. You called me crying because the stove broke. I can't keep dropping everything to run over. You need more help than I can give. This place is good. They'll take care of you." "But Michael, He held up a hand, impatient now. "Mom, please don't make this harder. I've already signed the papers. You'll have your own room, nurses, meals, everything." My heart lurched. Signed. The word clanged in my head like a slammed door. "Signed?" I whispered. "Without asking me?" He looked away. "It's what's best. You'll thank me later." I wanted to scream, to beg, to remind him of the nights I stayed awake when he was sick as a child, of the sacrifices Richard and I made so he could have a better life. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt like glass. I could only watch as he unloaded my suitcase, set it by the curb, and handed me a folder of documents I hadn't read. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "This is for your own good." He kissed my cheek, quick, cold, and turned back to the car. "Michael," I called, my voice cracking. "It's my birthday." He paused, hand on the door, but didn't look back. "I know, Mom. Happy birthday." And then he drove away. The nurse at the desk was kind enough, her smile professional, rehearsed like someone used to welcoming the unwanted. She showed me to my room, small, beige, clean. The bed was neatly made, the dresser empty, a single framed painting of flowers hanging crookedly on the wall. "You'll get used to it," she said, as if comfort could grow from routine. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of my life compressed into one suitcase and a signed document. Outside, a group of residents played cards, laughing faintly, their eyes tired but knowing. I realized with a sinking ache that I had joined their ranks, the forgotten, the inconvenient, the ones left behind under the guise of love. That night, I lay awake listening to the soft hum of machines, the distant sound of television chatter, and the hollow echo of footsteps in the hall. I thought of Richard, of the promise we made to grow old together, of the warmth of our kitchen, of the laughter that once filled our home. I whispered his name into the darkness, wishing he could answer. Days passed in slow procession. Breakfast at 7, pills at 9, television at 10, lunch at noon. The same bland food, the same polite small talk. I smiled when spoken to, but inside I was empty. I watched as families came to visit other residents, daughters bringing flowers, grandchildren sharing hugs. But no one came for me. Not Michael, not Lily, not once. One afternoon, I sat by the window, staring at the garden outside, when I heard 2 nurses chatting nearby. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "Someone in room 12 bought a lottery ticket last week. Left it on the desk. Turns out it's a winner, a big one." The other laughed. "Can you imagine? Stuck in here with a winning ticket?" I smiled faintly at their conversation, thinking how cruelly ironic that would be. Fortune finding you only after freedom was gone. I didn't think much more of it. That night, as I unpacked my last sweater, I found something I didn't remember packing. A folded slip of paper tucked into the pocket of my purse. It was a lottery ticket, dated the day before Michael brought me here. I frowned, confused. I barely remembered buying it. Maybe I had picked it up with groceries, a whim at the register. I turned it over in my hands, the numbers meaningless. The next morning after breakfast, I asked the nurse if I could borrow her radio. She handed it over with a curious smile. "Big drawing last night," she said. "Everyone's checking." I tuned the dial, heart oddly steady, as the announcer read the winning numbers one by one. With each one, my breath caught a little tighter. First match, then second, then third. By the 5th, my hands trembled. By the 6th, I couldn't breathe. Every number matched. I stared at the ticket, the faded ink shimmering in the morning light, and began to laugh. Not loud, not wild, but deep, steady, almost reverent. The kind of laugh that sounds like tears. I, Evelyn Moore, the woman my son had abandoned on her birthday, was now a millionaire. It wasn't joy that filled me, not at first. It was vindication, the kind that seeps into your bones and whispers, "You are not done yet." But fortune, I knew, was only power if you wielded it wisely. And revenge, sweet poetic revenge, tastes best when served with grace. I folded the ticket carefully, tucked it into my Bible, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not just for the money, but for the message. Life, it seemed, wasn't finished teaching me how to rise. That evening, I asked to use the phone. My hands shook as I dialed Michael's number. He didn't answer. I left a message anyway, voice calm, almost kind. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. Just wanted to thank you for the gift you gave me this week. You were right. I do need a new place. But soon, I'll be moving somewhere much bigger." I hung up, smiling softly. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I wasn't broken. I was becoming. Outside, the sky burned gold as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in light. And as I watched, I felt something shift. Not luck, not fate, but destiny finally circling back to where it belonged. I didn't know then how much my life was about to change, or how far I would go to make sure Michael learned the lesson he'd written himself. But deep down, I knew. What he had abandoned wasn't weakness. It was the seed of strength, and it had just been given sunlight. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds like threads of gold, gentle yet insistent, coaxing me from sleep. I had dreamt of Richard again, his hand warm around mine, his voice soft and certain as he said, "You're not finished yet, Evelyn." I woke with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't the same tears I had shed when Michael left me here. These were different, lighter, steadier. They didn't sting. They cleansed. I sat up, the lottery ticket still folded neatly inside my Bible, and smiled for the first time in years without forcing it. For the first time in a long while, the day ahead didn't feel like a repetition. It felt like a beginning. After breakfast, I walked slowly down the corridor toward the administrator's office. My cane clicked softly against the floor, echoing like a quiet drumbeat announcing change. Mrs. Pearson, the head nurse, looked up as I entered, her expression kind but cautious. "Mrs. Moore, is everything all right?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Everything is better than all right. I'm checking out." She blinked. "Checking out? You mean leaving? But your son—" "My son," I interrupted gently, "made a decision for me. Now I'm making one for myself." She hesitated. "You've only been here a week." "Long enough to realize I don't belong in a waiting room for life." I smiled. "I'm ready to go home." Home. The word felt different now. It wasn't about walls or furniture. It was about freedom. I signed the discharge papers myself this time. No forged signatures, no quiet betrayals. Just my own hand, steady and deliberate. The staff offered polite goodbyes, their smiles tinted with curiosity. I knew they wondered how I would manage alone, but they didn't know that I was no longer alone. Fate, luck, destiny, whatever name you give it, had chosen to sit beside me again. Outside, the air felt sharper, more alive. The world buzzed with possibility. I called a cab, gave the driver the address of my old house, and watched through the window as the nursing home shrank behind us, swallowed by distance. When we pulled into the familiar street, my heart squeezed. The maple tree Richard had planted still stood tall in the yard, its leaves swaying in the breeze. The shutters were faded, the porch steps cracked, but to me, it was still beautiful. I paid the driver and stood there for a long while, letting memories wash over me. Laughter, dinners, birthdays, the echoes of a family that had once been whole. The key still fit. The air inside smelled like dust and nostalgia, like a chapter waiting to be reopened. I set my bag down, drew back the curtains, and whispered, "Welcome home, Evelyn." That afternoon, I called Angela, an old neighbor who had been one of my closest friends before life pulled us apart. Her voice was warm, surprised. "Evelyn, is that really you? I heard you moved into one of those homes." "Not anymore," I said, laughing softly. "I'm back where I belong." She gasped. "Good heavens, what happened?" "It's a long story," I replied, glancing at the Bible on the table where the lottery ticket rested inside. "But let's just say my fortunes have changed." Angela insisted on coming over. Within the hour she arrived, arms full of groceries, eyes wide with curiosity. "You look different," she said, hugging me tight. "You look alive." "I feel alive," I said. We brewed tea, and I told her everything, the nursing home, the birthday, the ticket. When I finished, She stared at me, mouth open. You mean to tell me you're a millionaire? I smiled. A very quiet one, yes. She leaned back, shaking her head. Oh, Evelyn. You always did have angels looking out for you. Or maybe, I said softly, I finally learned to listen. Over the next few days, I began to plan, not just for myself, but for the life I had nearly been robbed of. I called a lawyer, set up a trust, and opened an account in my own name. I wanted everything to be clean, deliberate, untouchable. This time, no one would sign anything on my behalf. Then I began to dream bigger. Not of mansions or jewels, but of purpose. I remembered how it felt to be left behind, to feel invisible, voiceless. There were so many like me, mothers, widows, elders, abandoned in quiet corners of the world by those who should have stood beside them. Maybe my story could become their light. I started small. I donated anonymously to Willow Grove, not out of sentiment, but to improve the lives of those still inside. New books for the library, better meals, comfortable chairs. Then I reached further. A fund for elderly women facing eviction, a scholarship for caregivers, a hotline for those forgotten by family. Each act stitched a piece of my heart back together. But still, there was one thread left dangling. Michael. My son. He hadn't called. Not once. Perhaps guilt kept him silent. Or perhaps pride did. Either way, I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later he'd come. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe need. I didn't plan to seek him out. The universe has a way of delivering its lessons right on time. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen sipping tea, the phone rang. The sound startled me. It had been days since anyone had called. I picked it up, half expecting Angela again. But it was his voice, hesitant, tired. Mom? My hand tightened on the receiver. Michael. Mom, He stopped, sighing. I didn't know if you'd answer. I almost didn't, I said honestly. There was a long pause. I'm sorry. For everything. I thought I was doing what was best. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until Lily asked why Grandma wasn't coming to her recital. His voice cracked on the word Grandma. For the first time, I heard not arrogance, but remorse. I missed her recital, I said softly. I missed a week of her life I'll never get back. I know, he whispered. I messed up, Mom. I was stressed. The divorce. I stopped him gently. Excuses are the armor of cowards, Michael. You don't need armor with me. Just honesty. Silence. Then, softly. You're right. We spoke for nearly an hour, not of blame, but of truth. He told me about the loneliness, the fear of failing, the burden he'd felt trying to juggle work, parenting, and guilt. I listened, not as a victim, but as a woman who had learned that forgiveness is not weakness. When we hung up, I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. He had made his choices. Now I would make mine. The next morning, I visited the bank with my lawyer, Mr. Simmons, a kind man with gray hair and a sharp mind. Together, we established the Moore Foundation, dedicated to helping families rebuild trust and elderly parents reclaim independence. It wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. That afternoon, I sat in my garden, Richard's garden, watching the sunlight dance across the petals. I imagined him there beside me, proud, amused. You've done well, Eve, I could almost hear him say, better than they deserved. A few days later, a letter arrived, official, embossed with gold lettering, the State Lottery Commission. Inside was the confirmation. My winnings were processed, my funds released. The amount was staggering, more money than I had ever imagined touching in this lifetime. I held the paper close, whispering, "Thank you." Not to the numbers, but to the journey that had led me here. That evening, I allowed myself a small celebration. Candles, a home-cooked meal, music from the old record player. Angela joined me, raising her glass. To Evelyn Moore, she toasted, the woman who turned heartbreak into history. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. As night settled, I found myself thinking about Willow Grove, the faces I'd left behind. Some had families who visited, others did not. They deserved more than quiet hallways and forgotten birthdays. I made a note to visit soon, not as a resident, but as a benefactor. Before bed, I stood by the window, gazing at the stars. Somewhere out there, Michael was tucking Lily into bed, perhaps thinking of me. Maybe he was beginning to understand the weight of his choices. Or maybe he wasn't ready yet. Either way, the lesson was in motion. I pressed my hand to the glass, whispering, "Thank you for leaving me when you did, because in losing you, I found myself." The wind rustled through the trees outside, carrying the scent of lilacs. It smelled like closure, like healing. And though my story had begun in abandonment, it was far from over. Because destiny, like the tide, always returns to shore. And mine was just starting to rise. The morning air felt crisp, carrying the scent of renewal, wet earth, fresh blooms, and quiet promises. I had spent the last week rebuilding my home piece by piece, not just with paint and furniture, but with peace. Every corner now whispered resilience. The house no longer echoed loneliness, it breathed gratitude. I was no longer the woman abandoned on her birthday. I was a woman reborn on her own terms. Still, one piece of the puzzle remained undone. Forgiveness is a seed that must be planted in fertile soil. And though I had spoken of grace, I hadn't yet faced the one who had broken me. That morning, as I stirred sugar into my tea, a knock echoed through the hallway. Hesitant, uncertain. I knew that rhythm. The pause between knocks gave him away before I even opened the door. Michael stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. Guilt is a weight that bends even the proudest backs, and I could see it pressing down on him. He tried to smile. "Hi, Mom." I let him stand there for a moment, not out of cruelty, but reflection. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any greeting. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." He crossed the threshold slowly, eyes drifting across the familiar walls as though they belonged to a stranger's home. Maybe in a way they did. He wasn't the only one who had changed. "Place looks good," he murmured. "It's mine again," I replied. "Everything you see here, I've reclaimed, piece by piece." He nodded, uneasy, hands fidgeting in his pockets. "I heard you left Willow Grove." "I did, the day I remembered who I was." His eyes flickered. "I wanted to come sooner, I didn't know if you'd want to see me." I motioned to the table. "Sit, Michael. If we're going to talk, let's do it properly." He sat opposite me, glancing at the steaming teacup I'd placed before him. "You remembered how I take it," he said quietly. "I remember everything," I answered, my voice calm, steady. That's the thing about mothers. We remember the first steps, the scraped knees, the late-night fevers. We remember every time you said, "I love you," and every time you didn't. He winced, his eyes dropping. "I was wrong, Mom. I thought I was helping. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I was drowning. Work, bills, the divorce. You became one more thing I thought I couldn't carry." "And so you dropped me," I said softly. "Like baggage." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry, truly. I thought you'd be better off. I see now how cruel that was. You didn't deserve that." "No," I said. "I didn't. But life doesn't give us what we deserve, Michael. It gives us what we allow. And that day, I allowed myself to believe I was a burden. Never again. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. Can you ever forgive me? Forgiveness. Such a small word for such a heavy act. I studied his hand, older now, marked with the lines of a man who'd learned hard lessons too late. I placed my hand over his. I already have, I said. But forgiveness isn't a key to the past, Michael. It's a door to the future. The question is whether you're ready to walk through it. He nodded, swallowing hard. I am. I want to make things right. I want you back in our lives. In Lily's life. She misses you. Does she? I whispered, smiling faintly. I've missed her too. Tell me about her. His face softened as he spoke of her. Her drawings, her laughter, her questions about Grandma's garden. With every word, the tension eased, replaced by something tender, fragile, real. Love doesn't vanish. It hibernates, waiting for courage to wake it. After a while, I rose and fetched an envelope from the cabinet. I set it before him. What's this? He asked. Your second chance, I said. He opened it slowly. Inside was a check. Not a small one, but not a fortune either. Enough to pay off his debts, enough to breathe again. Mom, I can't take this, he said, shaking his head. Not after everything. Yes, you can, I said firmly. Because this isn't charity, it's redemption. You gave me abandonment on my birthday. I'm giving you mercy on mine. His eyes filled again, but this time with something brighter than guilt, gratitude. How could you? Because I won, I said simply. And not just the lottery. His head snapped up. What? I smiled, watching the realization dawn. A week after you left me there, I found a ticket in my purse. It matched every number. I've spent the last few days rebuilding my life, not to show you what you lost, but to remind myself of what I never will again. He sat back, stunned. You're rich? I chuckled softly. Rich in more ways than one. Money gives choices, Michael. But character gives peace. I've learned both are priceless. He stared down at the check again, the edges trembling in his hands. I don't deserve this. No, I said. But neither did I deserve to be left behind. And yet, here we are, both given what we didn't earn. That's grace, son, the kind you don't waste. We sat in silence after that, the weight between us shifting, transforming. The anger that once filled my chest had dissolved into something gentler. Resolve. I wasn't here to punish. I was here to teach. Will you come see Lily? He asked finally. She'd be so happy. I will, I said. But not as the woman you dropped off at Willow Grove. As the woman I've become. He smiled through tears. She's going to love that woman. I hope so, I said softly. She's the kind of grandmother who knows her worth. After he left, I stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the street. My heart was heavy, but not in the old way. This was the weight of release, the ache of letting go. The next day, I visited the town hall with Angela to finalize the Moore Foundation's paperwork. As we signed the last forms, she looked up at me and said, You know, Evelyn, most people would have used that money to build walls. You're building bridges. I smiled. Because walls keep others out. Bridges bring them home. That weekend I returned to Willow Grove, not as a resident, but as a benefactor. The staff greeted me with shock and delight. I met with Mrs. Pearson and presented a donation large enough to renovate the recreation hall, upgrade medical equipment, and provide enrichment programs. No one here should feel forgotten, I told her. Not while they still have stories to tell. As I walked the familiar halls, I passed my old room, the beige walls, the crooked painting. I paused, resting a hand on the doorframe. Thank you, I whispered, for being my cocoon. Outside, the garden was in bloom. I sat on a bench, watching residents enjoy the sunshine. One of them, a woman with soft white curls, turned to me and smiled. "First time here?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I'm seeing it differently now." She nodded knowingly. "Funny how life works that way. You lose something and it teaches you how to look." I laughed softly. "Yes, it does." That evening, back home, I received a call from Michael. "Lily wants to see you," he said. "She made you a drawing." "I'd love that," I replied. "Tell her Grandma has something for her too." When we met the next day at the park, Lily ran to me, arms wide, laughter spilling from her like music. She handed me a crayon drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow. Grandma, Daddy, Lily. Tears filled my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She looked up, curious. "Are you happy now, Grandma?" I smiled, pulling her close. "Happier than I've ever been, sweetheart, because I finally found home." Michael watched, silent, his eyes glistening. For once, he didn't try to fix or explain. He simply let love breathe. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and lavender, I realized the circle had closed. What began as betrayal had become rebirth. What was meant to break me had built me instead. That night, as I tucked Lily's drawing into my Bible beside the winning ticket, I whispered, "Thank you, Richard. We did it." I closed the book, not as a symbol of ending, but of completion. Because every story worth telling isn't about what you lose. It's about who you become after. And I had become the woman my son would never again mistake for an extra mouth to feed. I had become Evelyn Moore, survivor, mother, millionaire, and miracle. But destiny wasn't finished with me yet. For in the quiet of that night, the phone rang once more. A voice on the line, unfamiliar, yet warm. "Mrs. Moore, this is the State Foundation for Senior Empowerment. We've heard about your story and your foundation. Would you consider joining our board?" I smiled into the dark. "Yes," I said softly. "It's time to give back what was given to me." The journey wasn't over. It was evolving, from loss to lesson, from pain to purpose. And tomorrow, I'd wake not as the woman left behind, but as the one leading the way forward. The morning of my first board meeting arrived with the soft hush of dawn, the sky brushed in lavender and gold. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the lapel of a tailored suit I never imagined I'd wear again. The woman staring back wasn't the fragile figure abandoned at Willow Grove. She was the architect of her own restoration. Her eyes no longer pleaded for belonging. They reflected certainty. Confidence stitched itself into every seam of my reflection. I thought of Richard, of how he used to say, "Grace doesn't shout, Evelyn. It simply stands." That morning, I understood what he meant. The State Foundation for Senior Empowerment met in a glass building downtown. Modern, sleek, almost intimidating. But as I walked through its revolving doors, there was no tremor in my step. My heels clicked against the marble like a steady drumbeat, echoing the rhythm of a heart at peace. The receptionist greeted me warmly, and soon I was ushered into a room of polished oak tables and thoughtful faces. The director, a woman named Margaret Dean, extended her hand. "Mrs. Moore, thank you for joining us. We've been following your work with the Moore Foundation. Truly inspiring." I smiled, shaking her hand firmly. "Please, call me Evelyn. I'm honored to be here. If my story can help even one person feel seen again, then every step was worth it." As the meeting began, I listened to discussions about programs, funding, outreach. Words like advocacy and empowerment filled the air. But beneath the jargon, I heard something deeper. A calling. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, hands resting on the table's edge. "When we talk about empowerment," I began, "we often picture strength as loud, forceful. But for many of us, especially seniors. Strength is quieter. It's found in the whisper that says, "You matter," when the world decides you don't. It's in the courage to begin again when everyone else has written your ending. The room fell silent. Faces softened. Margaret nodded, jotting something in her notes. "Well said, Evelyn. Would you consider leading a new initiative? A mentorship program pairing seniors with at-risk families? Sharing wisdom, rebuilding connection?" I felt my heart lift. "Yes," I said. "Because isolation is a slow kind of death. Connection, that's what saves us." After the meeting, as I walked out into the sunlight, a group of younger volunteers approached. One, a woman in her 20s, with tired eyes and a tentative smile, stopped me. "Mrs. Moore," she said, "I read about what happened to you. My mom's in a nursing home, and we don't talk much. But after hearing your story, I called her. We're having dinner this weekend." Tears pricked my eyes. "That's beautiful," I whispered. "Remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom." She nodded, and for a moment, 2 generations stood together, healing something larger than themselves. Later that week, I visited my foundation's office, a converted brick building near the park. The sign out front gleamed in the afternoon light. The Moore Foundation for Renewal and Respect. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet purpose. Volunteers sorted supplies, counselors took calls, and in one corner, an artist was painting a mural, an image of open hands releasing doves into a sunrise. I paused, watching the colors unfold. "It's you," the artist said with a grin. "The woman who set them free." I laughed softly. Maybe it's all of us. At my desk, a stack of letters waited. Handwritten notes from seniors across the state. Some thanked me for reminding them they were still worthy of love. Others shared their own stories of loss and renewal. One in particular caught my breath. A woman named Ruth wrote, "My daughter stopped visiting years ago. I thought I'd die forgotten. Then I heard your story. I decided to start painting again. Thank you for giving me back my colors." I pressed the letter to my chest. This, I thought, is the real jackpot. Not numbers on a ticket, but lives rekindled by hope. That evening, I met Michael and Lily for dinner. The restaurant was simple, cozy, filled with the warm hum of conversation. Lily ran to greet me, clutching a small gift bag. "Grandma, I made you something." Inside was a bracelet, plastic beads spelling "Love Wins." I slipped it on, tears welling. "It's perfect," I said, hugging her close. Michael watched, eyes misty. "She wanted you to have it. She says you're her hero." I looked at him. Really looked. The arrogance that once shadowed his face had been replaced by humility, understanding. He was still my son, flawed and learning, but finally awake to the lessons life had written in bold ink. "Heroes are just people who keep going," I said gently, "even when it hurts." He reached for my hand. "I still think about that day, Mom. Dropping you off. It haunts me." "Let it remind you," I said, "but don't let it chain you. We grow from our ghosts when we learn to listen." Dinner was laughter and light. Lily told stories about school, about her dream to be a teacher, about how she wanted to help people feel seen. I smiled, realizing the legacy was already blooming. As we stepped outside, the sky stretched wide and pink above us. Lily pointed upward. "Look, Grandma, a rainbow." I followed her gaze. A soft arc glowed across the horizon, faint but steady. "Do you know what a rainbow means, sweetheart?" She nodded. "It means promises." "Yes," I whispered, "and that the storm has passed." Days flowed into weeks, each one rich with purpose. I spent mornings at the foundation, afternoons mentoring younger women, and evenings painting in my studio. My latest work, a canvas of open windows overlooking a sunlit sea, hung drying on the easel, I titled it Becoming. Because that's what life is, a constant unfolding, a journey from brokenness to beauty. One afternoon, while preparing for a televised interview about senior empowerment, I found myself reflecting on the improbable path that led me here. A year ago, I was invisible, a discarded mother labeled an extra mouth. Now, I was a voice, and voices once found echo far beyond their beginnings. When the interviewer asked, "Evelyn, what message do you have for others who feel abandoned or forgotten?" I took a breath, steady and deep. "You are not defined by who left you," I said. "You are defined by who you become after they're gone. Don't let betrayal bury you. Let it plant you. Because even seeds left in darkness reach for the light." The clip went viral. Letters poured in. And though fame was never my aim, I welcomed every story shared, every tear shed, every person who whispered, "Me too." Months later, on the anniversary of that fateful birthday, I hosted a celebration, not of wealth, but of worth. The hall overflowed with faces from every chapter of my journey. Staff from Willow Grove, volunteers from the foundation, new friends, old neighbors, and most importantly, Michael and Lily. As music swirled and laughter filled the air, I stood at the podium, scanning the crowd. "Last year," I began, "I spent my birthday in a nursing home, left behind by the people I loved most. I thought my story had ended there. But endings," I smiled, "are often just beginnings wearing disguises. Tonight isn't about what I lost. It's about what I found. Faith, forgiveness, and the fierce joy of starting over." Applause rose like a wave. Lily climbed onto the stage, slipping her tiny hand into mine. "Grandma," she said into the microphone, "I love you." The room melted into smiles and tears. I hugged her close, whispering, "And I love you, more than all the stars." Later, as the night faded and guests departed, I lingered beneath the twinkling lights. Margaret Dean approached, handing me an envelope. "The governor wants to meet you," she said. "He's heard about your advocacy work. They're creating a new council on aging, and they want you to chair it." I exhaled, overwhelmed. "Me?" She nodded. "You've lived the struggle. Who better to lead the change?" I looked out at the moonlit sky, humbled. "All right," I whispered. "Let's keep building bridges." That night, alone in my garden, I lit a single candle and placed it beside Richard's photo. "We did it, love," I murmured. "Not through luck, but through faith. Thank you for believing I'd find my way." The flame flickered, steady and strong. I sat there, wrapped in the hush of crickets and wind, and let gratitude wash over me. For every wound turned wisdom, every tear turned triumph. For the son who'd learned remorse, the granddaughter who carried light, the strangers who found hope in my story. As dawn painted the horizon, I whispered one final vow to the sky. May my life be proof that no one is ever too old, too broken, or too forgotten to begin again. The candle's flame danced brighter, and somewhere within its glow, I felt the pulse of everything I'd become. Not a victim, not a number, a survivor, a storyteller, a woman reborn. Evelyn Moore, no longer the extra mouth, now the voice that feeds the world with hope. And that, I knew, was the greatest fortune of all.